This crazy woman banged on my fence and told me I was under arrest for owning too much land. She had fake HOA papers, a homemade badge, and the audacity to call 911 on me for land hoarding. Little did she know, the cops were about to give her the surprise of her lifetime. Before you watch complete story, comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Beautiful 180-acre ranch from my late uncle in the Texas Hill Country. After 15 years of cramped city apartments and soul-crushing corporate meetings, I thought I'd finally found paradise. Rolling green pastures, a creek that never runs dry, and the kind of silence you can only get when your nearest neighbor is 2 miles away through the trees. I was dead wrong about that last part. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning while I was fixing a section of fence that my horses had somehow managed to demolish overnight. I heard a car door slam with unnecessary force, followed by the sound of someone marching through gravel with the determination of a person on a mission. When I looked up, I saw her, a woman about 40 years old, stomping toward my fence line like she owned the place. "Sir, you need to come with me immediately," she announced like she was some kind of federal agent. "I'm Karen Henderson, Community Standards Enforcement Officer, and you're in violation of multiple land regulations." I set down my tools and stared at her. Community Standards Enforcement Officer? In the middle of rural Texas? This had to be some kind of joke. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is private property." Karen's eyes blazed with righteous fury. "Don't play dumb with me. Your excessive land ownership is terrorizing the community. 180 acres is psychological warfare against working families." I looked around at my empty pastures, my peaceful cattle, and the complete absence of any neighbors within miles. "What community exactly?" She pointed toward some mobile homes barely visible through the trees about 2 miles away. "The Riverside community has filed formal complaints about your land hoarding. We demand immediate downsizing to a reasonable 20 acres. That's when I realized this woman was completely serious. She actually believed she had authority over my family's ranch that I'd inherited 3 years ago. I'd left my corporate job in Dallas for this peaceful life, and now I was dealing with a self-appointed land dictator. "Ma'am, I don't know what authority you think you have, but this ranch has been in my family since the 1960s. I have all the legal documentation." Karen pulled out a thick folder of papers and slammed it against my fence. "These are official violation notices. You have 72 hours to begin compliance or face community action." I took the papers and nearly burst out laughing. They were printed on regular computer paper in Comic Sans font, complete with spelling errors and a logo that looked like it came from a free clip art website. The Riverside Community Authority was demanding I reduce my land to 20 acres, remove all visible livestock, and attend mandatory community meetings. "These look homemade," I said, flipping through the pages. "Those are legitimate legal documents," Karen snapped. "And if you don't comply, I'm calling the police to report you for land intimidation." Land intimidation. I'd heard everything now. This woman was threatening to call the cops on me for owning too much land. I almost wanted her to do it just to see what would happen. "Go ahead and call them," I said. "I'd love to hear their opinion on land intimidation." Karen's face turned red. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Well, we'll see how smart you feel when you're in handcuffs for community harassment." She stomped back to her beat-up sedan and peeled out of my driveway, leaving me standing there with a stack of fake legal documents wondering what kind of insanity I'd just witnessed. But I had a feeling this was just the beginning. 2 days later, I was feeding my horses when I heard multiple car doors slamming. This time Karen had brought backup, 3 other middle-aged women who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. They marched up to my fence in formation like some kind of suburban SWAT team. "Mr. Morrison," Karen announced through a bullhorn she'd apparently acquired, "we're here to conduct an official property inspection." I walked over to them, genuinely curious about how much deeper this rabbit hole went. "Ma'am, you can't just inspect someone's private property. According to Community Standard Section 12, we have the right to inspect any property that affects community welfare," one of her companions said, reading from a laminated card. I noticed the other women kept glancing at each other nervously, like they weren't entirely sure what they'd gotten themselves into. One of them whispered something to Karen that made her jaw clench. "Ladies," I said politely, "I don't know what Karen told you, but she has no legal authority here. This is private property and you're trespassing." That's when Karen lost it completely. "We have community authority. This excessive land ownership is ruining property values and intimidating families." "What families?" I asked. "The nearest house is 2 miles away. The Riverside families live in fear of your land monopoly," Karen shouted, waving her bullhorn around dangerously. They're too scared to complain directly, so we're speaking for them. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency police line right there in front of them. Hi, this is Jake Morrison on County Road 15. I have several people on my property who are refusing to leave. While I was on the phone, I watched Karen's backup slowly start backing away from the fence. Apparently, the reality of police involvement was making them reconsider their commitment to whatever cause Karen had recruited them for. The police are on their way, I announced after hanging up. Two of Karen's companions immediately headed back to their cars, muttering apologies. But Karen stood her ground, clutching her bullhorn and fake authority like they were going to protect her from reality. I'm not intimidated by corrupt law enforcement, she declared. This is community organizing and we have rights. 20 minutes later, Deputy Sheriff Mike Rodriguez pulled into my driveway. I'd met him before at the local diner, and he was a no-nonsense guy who dealt with every kind of crazy the county had to offer. Jake, he said as he got out of his patrol car, what's the situation here? Before I could answer, Karen marched over to him with her bullhorn and fake documents. Officer, this man is illegally hoarding land and terrorizing the community. I demand you arrest him immediately. Deputy Rodriguez looked at Karen, then at me, then back at Karen. Ma'am, what's your name and address? I'm Karen Henderson, Community Standards Enforcement Officer for the Riverside Authority, she announced, pulling out her homemade badge. And where exactly do you live, Mrs. Henderson? Karen hesitated for just a moment too long. I represent the community interests. My specific address is irrelevant to this land violation. Deputy Rodriguez wasn't buying it. Ma'am, I need to see some identification, and I need to know why you're on this gentleman's property. That's when Karen made the mistake that would change everything. Instead of showing her ID, she pulled out her phone and called 911 right there in front of a sheriff's deputy. 911, I need immediate assistance, she said into the phone. There's a man here with too much land who's terrorizing the community. He's using excessive land ownership as psychological warfare against working families. I need you to send backup immediately. Deputy Rodriguez and I both stared at her in disbelief. She'd actually called 911 to report someone for owning too much land. The dispatcher's confused voice was clearly audible, asking her to repeat what she'd just said. 180 acres is intimidation, Karen continued into the phone. This is land hoarding and it's making families feel poor. I need him arrested for community harassment. Deputy Rodriguez gently took the phone from her and identified himself to the dispatcher. This is Deputy Rodriguez. I'm already on scene. We're dealing with a possible false report situation. That's when Karen realized she'd made a massive mistake. The confidence drained from her face as the reality of filing a false police report started to sink in. Ma'am, Deputy Rodriguez said seriously, I need to see your identification right now. Karen fumbled in her purse and produced a driver's license. As the deputy examined it, his expression grew more serious. Mrs. Henderson, your address shows you live in Millbrook Estates, about 15 miles from here. That's not anywhere near the Riverside community you claim to represent. I represent all rural residents affected by land inequality, Karen said weakly. Ma'am, there is no Riverside Community Authority. I've been patrolling this area for 8 years, and there's no such organization registered with the county. Deputy Rodriguez looked at the fake documents Karen had given me earlier. These appear to be homemade, and calling 911 to report someone for owning too much land constitutes filing a false report. Karen's whole world was collapsing around her. This is corruption. You're protecting the wealthy landowners while working families suffer. Ma'am, you're going to need to come with me, Deputy Rodriguez said, pulling out his handcuffs. You're under arrest for filing a false police report, trespassing, and harassment. As he read Karen her rights, she kept screaming about land inequality and community justice. But her voice was getting smaller and more desperate as the reality of her situation became clear. This isn't over, she yelled as Deputy Rodriguez put her in the back of his patrol car. The community will remember this injustice. As they drove away, I stood there in my peaceful pasture, looking out over the land that had supposedly caused so much trouble. My cattle were grazing quietly, my horses were dozing in the shade, and everything was exactly as it should be. 3 days later, Deputy Rodriguez stopped by to update me on Karen's situation. She'd been charged with multiple offenses and had to pay a substantial fine. But the best part was what he told me about her background check. Jake, you're not going to believe this, he said, shaking his head. Karen Henderson has been evicted from 3 different communities in the past 5 years for similar behavior. She has a pattern of appointing herself as some kind of community authority and then harassing anyone who doesn't follow her made-up rules. You're kidding. Not even a little bit. She tried to establish community standards at a subdivision in Austin, got kicked out of a mobile home park for harassing residents about their landscaping, and was banned from a rural community near San Antonio for trying to regulate people's livestock. So this is what she does? Apparently. The judge ordered her to stay at least 500 yards away from your property and prohibited her from contacting you in any way. She's also required to undergo community service and anger management counseling. I felt a surge of satisfaction that surprised me. After days of being harassed by someone who seemed completely immune to reason, justice was finally being served. There's more, Deputy Rodriguez continued with a grin. We got calls from residents at Millbrook Estates where she actually lives. Turns out she's been trying to establish fake community standards there too. The homeowner association president filed a complaint about her harassing behavior, and now she's facing eviction from her own community. The irony was perfect. The woman who tried to drive me off my own land was getting kicked out of her own neighborhood for the same controlling behavior. What about her claims about representing the Riverside families? We checked that out too. There are about 6 families living in those mobile homes you can see from your property, and none of them have ever heard of Karen Henderson. In fact, when we explained what happened, they were pretty annoyed that someone was claiming to speak for them without permission. 2 weeks later, I got a handwritten letter from someone named Maria Santos who lived in the mobile home community Karen had claimed to represent. Dear Mr. Morrison, it read, "We heard about what happened with that crazy woman who said she was speaking for us. We wanted you to know that none of us have any problem with your ranch. In fact, we think it's beautiful and we're glad to have such a peaceful neighbor. That woman never spoke to any of us before claiming to represent our community. Thank you for standing up to her harassment, and please know that you're welcome here anytime." I folded the letter and put it in my kitchen drawer, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. It turned out that my peaceful ranch life wasn't just good for me, it was good for the real community around me too. But the story wasn't over yet. Karen had one more trick up her sleeve, and it was going to be her most desperate move yet. A week after her arrest, I was working in my barn when my neighbor from the mobile home community, Maria Santos, knocked on my door. She looked worried and was holding a thick envelope. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "we all got these in our mailboxes yesterday. I think you need to see this." I opened the envelope and couldn't believe what I was reading. It was a legal-looking document titled Community Land Redistribution Petition, with Karen's name at the bottom as Community Advocate and Land Justice Coordinator. She was trying to organize the mobile home residents to file a class action lawsuit against me for economic intimidation through excessive land ownership. The document claimed that my 180 acres were causing psychological distress to families living in smaller spaces and that I should be forced to sell 160 acres to the county for community development. It was filled with legal-sounding language about land inequality and democratic property rights, but it was just as fake as everything else Karen had produced. "Maria, did anyone actually sign this?" She shook her head firmly. "Not a single person. We all think the woman is completely crazy. But we're worried she might cause more trouble for you." That's when I learned just how far Karen's obsession had gone. Over the next few days, I discovered that she'd been driving around the county trying to recruit other rural property owners to join her land justice movement. She'd visited farms, ranches, and rural homesteads, telling people that large landowners like me were oppressing the working class and needed to be stopped. The problem was she'd picked the wrong county to try this nonsense. Texas ranchers don't take kindly to outsiders telling them what to do with their land, and Karen's recruitment efforts had backfired spectacularly. I started getting phone calls from other landowners in the area who'd been visited by Karen. Bill Thompson, who owned a 300-acre cattle ranch about 10 miles away, called me laughing so hard he could barely talk. "Jake, you're not going to believe this," he wheezed into the phone. "That crazy woman showed up at my gate yesterday with a clipboard and a megaphone, demanding I downsize my ranch because it was making poor people feel bad about their property size." "What did you do?" "I turned the sprinkler system on her," Bill said, still chuckling. "She ran back to her car screaming about agricultural terrorism and community oppression. Funniest thing I've seen in years." Tom Wilson, who owned a 400-acre horse ranch, had a similar story. "She tried to serve me with fake legal papers demanding I reduce my property to 20 acres. When I told her to get lost, she called 911 and reported me for land bullying." The more I heard, the more I realized that Karen wasn't just targeting me. She'd declared war on every large landowner in the county, and her behavior was getting more erratic and desperate by the day. That's when Deputy Rodriguez called with news that changed everything. "Jake, we've got a problem," he said. "Karen Henderson has been posting videos online claiming that there's a conspiracy of wealthy landowners in our county who are oppressing working families. She's calling for people to come here and protest the land inequality." My heart sank. "What kind of videos?" "She's filmed herself at your property line at Bill Thompson's ranch and at several other places, claiming that large landowners are engaged in psychological warfare against the poor. The videos are getting shared on social media, and we're concerned about outside agitators coming to the area." The next morning, I woke up to find 3 cars parked on the public road near my property entrance. A group of about 10 people were holding signs that read "Land Justice Now" and "Stop Rural Oppression." They were chanting something about property equality and democratic land use. I called Deputy Rodriguez immediately. "They're protesting my ranch." "We're on our way," he said. "Don't engage with them. Let us handle this." Within an hour, the sheriff's department had cordoned off the area and was checking IDs. It turned out that most of the protesters had driven from Austin and San Antonio after seeing Karen's videos online. They had no idea what they were actually protesting. They'd just been told that rural landowners were oppressing poor families. Sheriff Patterson himself showed up to handle the situation. He was a no-nonsense man in his 50s who'd been dealing with troublemakers for decades. "Folks," he announced through a bullhorn, "you're protesting on public property, which is your right. But I want you to understand that the property owner you're protesting has done nothing illegal. He owns his land legally, pays his taxes, and bothers nobody." One of the protesters, a young man with a "Fight the Power" t-shirt, shouted back, "What about the families he's intimidating with his excessive land ownership?" Sheriff Patterson looked genuinely confused. "Son, what families? The nearest house is 2 miles away, and those folks have no complaints about this ranch." That's when things got interesting. The sheriff had brought Maria Santos and 2 other residents from the mobile home community to talk to the protesters directly. "We're the families that woman claimed were being intimidated," Maria told the crowd. "None of us have any problem with Mr. Morrison's ranch. That crazy woman never spoke to us before claiming to represent us. We think she's mentally unstable." I watched from my porch as the wind went out of the protesters' sails. They'd driven hours to support families who didn't want their support, protesting a problem that didn't exist. Most of the protesters packed up and left within an hour, but 3 of them decided to escalate the situation. They climbed over my fence and started marching toward my house, chanting about land redistribution and property justice. That was a mistake. In Texas, trespassing on someone's property is taken very seriously, especially when you're doing it as part of a group. Sheriff Patterson arrested all 3 of them on the spot, and they were charged with criminal trespassing, disturbing the peace, and participating in an unlawful assembly. But the best part was what happened next. The local news stations picked up the story, and it wasn't the narrative Karen had been hoping for. "Local woman's fake land dispute sparks misguided protest," read the headline in the Austin paper. The story detailed Karen's history of harassment, her fake community standards, and her arrest for filing false police reports. The protesters looked like fools, and Karen's credibility was completely destroyed. The news coverage triggered an investigation into Karen's online activities. It turned out she'd been running multiple social media accounts, pretending to be different community members, all supporting her land justice cause. She'd been having conversations with herself, creating fake outrage, and manufacturing a movement that existed only in her head. The county attorney decided to prosecute Karen for cyberstalking, harassment, and conspiracy to incite public disorder. The charges carried potential jail time and hefty fines. 3 weeks later, I was in my kitchen making dinner when I saw a familiar car creeping slowly past my property line. It was Karen, but this time she wasn't stopping. She was just driving by, staring at my ranch with the kind of obsessive intensity that made my skin crawl. I called Deputy Rodriguez. "She's back. We see her," he said. "We've been following her for the past hour. She's been driving around all the properties she previously harassed, but she's staying on public roads. Technically, she's not violating her restraining order." "What's she doing?" "We think she's planning something. Her court date is next week, and her lawyer is probably telling her to stay away from everyone she's accused of harassing." But Karen doesn't seem to be listening to legal advice. The next morning, I got my answer about what Karen was planning. I found a manila envelope taped to my mailbox with "Final Notice" written in red marker across the front. Inside was a hand-drawn map of my property with different sections marked for community redistribution. Karen had divided my 180 acres into 20-acre plots and assigned them to different deserving families from the mobile home community. She'd even included a timeline for when I was supposed to vacate each section. The map was accompanied by a manifesto about land justice and economic equality that read like the ramblings of someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. She claimed to have divine authority to redistribute land to the deserving poor and threatened community action if I didn't comply with her redistribution plan. But the most disturbing part was the final paragraph. The corrupt legal system may protect land hoarders temporarily, but true justice cannot be stopped. The revolution begins with taking back stolen land from those who have too much. I immediately called Sheriff Patterson and faxed him a copy of the document. His response was swift and decisive. "Jake, this crosses the line into threatening behavior. We're issuing a warrant for her arrest right now." Within 2 hours, Karen was in custody again. This time, the charges included making terrorist threats, criminal harassment, and violation of a restraining order. The judge denied her bail, citing her escalating behavior and the potential danger to public safety. During her trial, the full extent of Karen's obsession came to light. Police had searched her apartment and found hundreds of photos of my ranch, detailed plans for redistributing rural properties throughout the county, and a journal filled with fantasies about leading a land revolution against wealthy property owners. The prosecutor painted a picture of a woman whose mental illness had manifested as an obsession with property ownership and perceived economic injustice. The defense argued for psychiatric treatment, but the judge was more concerned with protecting the community from Karen's increasingly erratic behavior. Karen was sentenced to 18 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of probation and mandatory psychiatric treatment. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the costs of the police investigations and was permanently banned from contacting me or coming within 5 miles of my property. As I sat in the courtroom listening to the sentence, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that this nightmare was finally over, but sadness that someone's life had been derailed by delusions and untreated mental illness. The judge's final words to Karen stuck with me. "Mrs. Henderson, your obsession with other people's property has cost you your freedom, your reputation, and your place in the community. I hope you use your time in prison to get the help you clearly need." 6 months later, I was fixing the same section of fence where this whole ordeal had started when I heard a familiar sound. A car door slamming with unnecessary force. My heart rate spiked for a moment before I looked up and saw Deputy Rodriguez walking toward me with a big grin on his face. "Jake, I thought you'd want to know," he called out. "We got word that Karen Henderson tried to organize a land justice movement in the women's prison. She was trying to convince other inmates that the prison was violating their property rights by not giving them individual cells." I burst out laughing. "Even in prison?" "Even in prison. The warden had to put her in solitary confinement for trying to establish unauthorized community standards for the other prisoners. Apparently, she created fake rules about cell assignments and tried to redistribute belongings based on her idea of economic justice. Some people never learn. The prison psychologist says it's going to take years of intensive therapy to help her understand that she can't control other people's property or lives. But at least she's finally getting the help she needs." As Deputy Rodriguez drove away, I looked out over my 180 acres of supposedly excessive land. The afternoon sun was painting the pastures golden, my cattle were peacefully grazing, and the only sounds were the gentle lowing of cows and the whisper of wind through the oak trees. I thought I was moving to the country for peace and quiet, but instead I'd gotten an education in how some people's mental illness can manifest as an obsession with controlling others. Karen had tried to turn my peaceful ranch into a battleground for her imaginary war against land inequality, but all she'd accomplished was proving that delusions can be dangerous when they're not treated properly. The best part was knowing that my ranch wasn't just my sanctuary anymore. It had become a symbol of standing up to bullies who try to impose their delusions on others, while also highlighting the importance of mental health treatment and community support. Every sunrise over those excessive pastures was a reminder that sometimes the best response to crazy is simply refusing to be intimidated by it, while also recognizing when someone needs professional help rather than legal consequences. The county had learned from the Karen Henderson incident and established a mental health crisis team to handle similar situations before they escalated to criminal behavior. My experience had helped create a system that could identify and help people like Karen before their delusions destroyed their lives and threatened others. As I finished repairing the fence and headed back toward the house, I couldn't help but smile at the memory of Karen's last desperate words as Deputy Rodriguez arrested her for the final time. "This land redistribution is divinely ordained," she'd screamed. But it wasn't divinely ordained. It was just the sad end of a woman's journey into delusion and obsession. And while justice had been served, I hoped that Karen would eventually get the help she needed to rebuild her life in a healthier way. The ranch was peaceful again, the community was safer, and I'd learned that sometimes defending your rights means helping ensure that mentally ill people get the treatment they deserve. It was a lesson I'd never forget, written across 180 acres of Texas hill country that would always be my sanctuary from the chaos of the world.